Picture standing on a windswept stretch of land, staring out at what looks like an endless expanse of water. But beneath those waves lies a hidden world, a forgotten highway that once connected continents. Long before ships or airplanes, ancient travelers walked across vast land bridges, moving between worlds we now think of as entirely separate. These submerged pathways weren't just geological quirks. They were the stage for some of the most pivotal moments in human history, shaping where we live, how we evolved, and even the stories we tell about our past. Today, we're diving into one of Earth's greatest mysteries, the lost land bridges that silently orchestrated the movement of life across the planet. Think about this. At the height of the last ice age, sea levels were so low that you could have walked from Siberia to Alaska on dry land, a region scientists call Beringia. This wasn't some narrow strip of land. It was a sprawling, 1,000-mile-wide corridor teeming with life, giant woolly mammoths, towering bison, and the first human explorers all crossed this bridge, unaware they were making history. But then, as the ice melted and the oceans rose, these connections vanished beneath the waves, leaving only whispers in the form of fossils, folklore, and fragments of DNA. What happened to these bridges? Why did they disappear? And what clues have they left behind for us to uncover? From the legendary Doggerland, a once thriving landscape now buried beneath the North Sea, to the ghostly remnants of Sundaland in Southeast Asia, these lost bridges are more than just sunken land, they're time capsules. They hold answers to how early humans spread across the globe, why certain animals exist only in isolated pockets, and how entire ecosystems were reshaped by forces we're still trying to understand. Some of these bridges vanished so completely that their existence was debated for centuries, dismissed as myth until hard evidence finally surfaced. So grab your virtual shovel. We're digging into the science, the surprises, and the unsolved puzzles of these ancient pathways. By the end of this journey, you'll never look at a map the same way again. To understand how these land bridges worked, we need to step back in time, way back to when Earth's climate swung dramatically between ice ages and warmer periods. Picture massive sheets of ice, some over 2 miles thick, spreading across continents. All that frozen water had to come from somewhere, and it came straight from the oceans. With so much water locked up in glaciers, sea levels plummeted, sometimes by more than 400 feet. That's like draining a swimming pool down to its last few inches, revealing hidden steps and ledges you never knew were there. Suddenly, shallow seafloors became dry land, stitching together continents like puzzle pieces forced apart by rising waters today. But these weren't just temporary sandbars or narrow strips of land. Some, like Beringia, spanned distances wider than entire countries, creating vast habitable landscapes. Imagine grasslands stretching as far as the eye could see, dotted with lakes and crisscrossed by rivers, a paradise for both animals and the humans who followed them. Scientists pieced together these lost worlds by studying clues buried in layers of sediment, like pages in a history book. Fossilized pollen reveals what plants grew there, while bones and tools tell us who or what walked there. Underwater sonar maps even show the ghostly outlines of ancient river valleys now drowned beneath the sea. What's fascinating is how these bridges acted like revolving doors for life. Creatures like the woolly mammoth or the saber-toothed cat used them to spread into new territories, while early humans ventured into unknown continents for the first time. But the bridges didn't last forever. When temperatures rose, the ice melted, and the oceans rushed back in, swallowing these highways within centuries. Some ecosystems were cut off overnight, leaving stranded species to evolve in isolation, which is why, for example, kangaroos exist only in Australia or why lemurs are found solely in Madagascar. The land bridges giveth, and the rising seas taketh away. Yet even as they vanished, these bridges left behind traces in our DNA. Modern genetic studies show that indigenous populations in the Americas share ancestry with people from Siberia, a living echo of those ancient migrations. The land bridges didn't just reshape the planet, they reshaped us. And that's the real wonder here. Earth's geography isn't just a stage for history. It's an active player, writing and rewriting the story of life with every change in sea level. So the next time you look at a globe, remember those continents weren't always so separate. Beneath the blue, there are forgotten roads waiting to be rediscovered. Beringia wasn't just a bridge, it was a thriving, dynamic world unto itself. Imagine stepping onto that frozen grassland 15,000 years ago, surrounded by a panorama unlike anything we'd recognize today. The air would have been crisp and dry, the horizon dotted with grazing herds of woolly mammoths, their shaggy coats swaying as they moved. Towering bison, larger than any alive now, would have lumbered across the landscape, while steppe lions bigger and fiercer than their African cousins prowled the edges. This wasn't a barren corridor, it was a fertile highway pulsing with life, where predators and prey played out an ancient dance under the pale Arctic sun. What's truly remarkable is how much we've pieced together about this lost world. Indigenous oral histories from Alaska and Siberia speak of a time when the land stretched farther, when ancestors walked across to new hunting grounds. These stories, passed down through generations, align eerily well with what scientists have uncovered. Archaeologists have found stone tools and campfires buried in the permafrost, evidence of the first intrepid humans who ventured eastward, following the herds that sustained them. And it wasn't just one migration. Genetic studies suggest multiple waves of people crossed Beringia over millennia, each group leaving its mark on the continents beyond. But Beringia's story isn't just about humans. The land bridge acted like a sieve for life, filtering which species could move between continents. Horses, for example, evolved in North America, crossed into Asia via Beringia, and later went extinct in their homeland, only to be reintroduced by European colonists thousands of years later. Meanwhile, camels made the opposite journey, originating in Asia before spreading into the Americas. This constant exchange shaped ecosystems on both sides of the bridge, creating a biological tapestry that still influences the distribution of species today. Then came the Great Thaw. As the last ice age waned, temperatures climbed, glaciers melted, and the seas began their relentless rise. Beringia didn't vanish overnight, it retreated gradually, its low-lying plains swallowed by the Bering Strait's rising waters. Some researchers believe the final submergence may have been hastened by catastrophic events, like the collapse of glacial dams that unleashed floods across the landscape. Within a few thousand years, what had once been a bustling thoroughfare was reduced to a scattering of islands like the Diomes, where today you can stand on one island in Russia and see another in the United States, a haunting reminder of the land that once connected them. Yet Beringia's legacy endures in ways we're still uncovering. When divers explore the seabed near the strait, they occasionally find tusks or bones preserved in the cold, dark depths, silent witnesses to a lost era. And in the DNA of modern indigenous peoples, from the Yupik of Alaska to the Evenki of Siberia, traces of those ancient journeys remain, etched into the very blueprint of humanity. Beringia may be gone, but its echoes ripple through time, reminding us that the borders we take for granted between nations, between continents, are fleeting in the grand sweep of Earth's story. While Beringia tells the story of ancient migrations between continents, another lost land bridge reveals how rising seas reshaped Europe itself. Picture a vast, low-lying plain stretching from the eastern coast of England all the way to the Netherlands and Denmark, a place now called Doggerland. This wasn't just a narrow land bridge, but a sprawling, fertile territory, rich with forests, rivers, and wetlands, teeming with wildlife and dotted with human settlements. For thousands of years, it was the heartland of Mesolithic Europe, a place where hunter-gatherers thrived in a landscape we can barely imagine today. The story of Doggerland's discovery reads like a detective novel. For centuries, fishermen trawling the North Sea hauled up more than just fish. They found ancient bones, stone tools, and even carved antlers, all preserved in the icy depths. These weren't random fragments, but clues to a lost civilization. In the early 20th century, scientists began piecing together the puzzle, realizing that these artifacts belonged to a time when the North Sea was dry land. Today, advanced sonar technology reveals stunning details: submerged river valleys, sunken hills, and even the outlines of what might have been campsites along vanished waterways. What made Doggerland so remarkable was its diversity. Unlike the frozen steppes of Beringia, this was a temperate paradise where aurochs, massive wild cattle, roamed through dense forests, and red deer grazed in marshlands. Rivers like the Rhine and Thames once merged here, creating a network of waterways that early humans navigated in dugout canoes. Archaeologists have found evidence of fish traps, wooden tools, and hearths, suggesting that Doggerland's people lived not just as nomadic hunters but as skilled stewards of their environment. They built temporary shelters, crafted intricate tools, and likely traded with communities across this interconnected landscape. Then came the deluge. As the last ice age ended, melting glaciers caused sea levels to rise steadily, swallowing Doggerland's low-lying coasts inch by inch. But the final blow may have been sudden, a catastrophic event around 8,000 years ago, when an underwater landslide off the coast of Norway triggered a tsunami. Waves as tall as 5-story buildings would have surged across the remaining land, drowning settlements, uprooting forests, and sealing Doggerland's fate beneath the waves. The survivors, if any, would have fled to higher ground, their homeland reduced to legend. Yet Doggerland's legacy lingers in unexpected ways. The sandbanks and shallows of the North Sea, like the famous Dogger Bank, are all that remain of its hills and plateaus. Even the name Doggerland comes from the Dutch fishing boats called doggers that once worked these waters. But perhaps the most haunting connection lies in folklore, stories from Britain and Scandinavia about sunken cities and drowned lands passed down through generations. Could these tales be distant memories of Doggerland's final days? Modern science is bringing this lost world back to life. By analyzing sediment cores, researchers can reconstruct ancient climates, revealing how Doggerland's environment shifted over millennia. DNA from submerged peat beds tells us what plants grew there, while the bones of extinct animals paint a vivid picture of its ecosystems. Some scientists even speculate that Doggerland could have been a cultural crossroads, where ideas and technologies spread between early European communities. Every new discovery peels back another layer, showing us that the history of human civilization isn't just written on land. It's hidden beneath the sea, waiting to be rediscovered. Now let's journey to the tropics, where an entirely different kind of land bridge once shaped human history: Sundaland. Unlike the frozen expanses of Beringia or the temperate plains of Doggerland, this was a lush, humid world, a sprawling peninsula that stitched together what we now know as Southeast Asia's islands. Imagine a map where Java, Sumatra, and Borneo weren't isolated dots in the ocean but part of a continuous landmass, connected to modern-day Thailand, Vietnam, and Malaysia by vast river deltas and dense rainforests. This was Sundaland, a lost world that served as both a cradle for early humans and a highway for their expansion across the globe. What makes Sundaland so extraordinary is how much of its story is still being written. While Beringia and Doggerland left behind bones and tools in icy or sandy sediments, Sundaland's tropical environment preserved evidence in unexpected ways, like the submerged caves of Borneo, where ancient handprints and rock art cling to walls now lapped by ocean tides. These aren't just random markings, they're snapshots of life from a time when early humans navigated this landscape, hunting giant tapirs and orangutans in forests that now lie beneath the South China Sea. The real game changer in Sundaland's story is its role in human migration. Genetic studies suggest this region was a crossroads where the ancestors of modern indigenous Australians, Papuans, and Southeast Asians intermingled before spreading further. One theory even proposes that Sundaland could have been the staging ground for humanity's first great seafaring leap, the colonization of Australia over 50,000 years ago. Think about that, people building rafts or canoes to cross open water from Sundaland's shrinking shores, making them some of the earliest known mariners in history. But Sundaland's disappearance wasn't just a slow drowning. Unlike Doggerland's tsunami or Beringia's gradual submergence, this landmass fractured in stages, creating what scientists call the Sunda Shelf. As seas rose, valleys flooded into straits, turning hills into islands and trapping species in isolated pockets. This explains why Borneo's rainforests host creatures found nowhere else, like the proboscis monkey or the clouded leopard, animals that once roamed freely across a connected continent. Even today, fishermen in the Java Sea occasionally haul up stumps of ancient trees, their roots still clutching soil from a world that vanished millennia ago. The most tantalizing mystery, what else might be down there? In 2018, divers exploring a submerged cave off the coast of Indonesia found stone tools and butchered animal bones, proof that humans lived on land now 60 feet underwater. Meanwhile, sonar surveys reveal ghostly river channels snaking across the seafloor, some lined with what could be archaeological sites. It's as if Sundaland is whispering to us, offering fragments of a story we're only beginning to decode, one that could rewrite our understanding of how early humans adapted to and ultimately survived Earth's relentless changes. While ice ages acted like a global faucet, raising and lowering sea levels to reveal or drown land bridges, there was another invisible force reshaping the planet at a much slower pace, the restless dance of tectonic plates. Picture Earth's crust not as a solid shell but as a jigsaw puzzle with pieces that slide, collide, and even dive beneath one another over millions of years. These movements didn't just cause earthquakes or build mountains, they quietly redrew the map, creating land bridges that vanished long before humans walked the Earth. Take the Isthmus of Panama, a narrow strip of land that seems unremarkable today, but triggered one of the most dramatic ecological shake-ups in history. Around 3 million years ago, tectonic forces pushed this landmass up from the seafloor, stitching together North and South America for the first time in tens of millions of years. Suddenly, animals that had evolved in isolation found themselves on a collision course. Saber-toothed cats and giant ground sloths crossed south, while armadillos and opossums marched north, a chaotic mixing of species scientists call the Great American Biotic Interchange. This wasn't just a few animals taking a stroll, it was a continental-scale reshuffling that rewrote entire food chains. But tectonic shifts didn't always build bridges, sometimes they destroyed them. Around 55 million years ago, a land connection between Greenland and Europe known as the Thulian Bridge sank beneath the waves as the Atlantic Ocean widened, stranding early mammals on either side. Similarly, the land bridge that once connected India to Madagascar slowly fragmented as the Indian plate raced northward, eventually crashing into Asia to form the Himalayas. These slow-motion collisions didn't just alter coastlines, they redirected the flow of evolution itself, isolating species and creating pockets of unique life. What's fascinating is how these tectonic events left fingerprints in the most unexpected places. When scientists study the DNA of modern animals, they find genetic splits that align perfectly with the timing of land bridge formations or collapses. For instance, the division between African and Asian elephants traces back to the drowning of a land connection near the modern-day Middle East, while the strange distribution of freshwater fish across continents hints at long-lost river systems that once flowed across now submerged plains. Yet tectonic land bridges weren't just highways for life, they were climate regulators too. The rise of the Isthmus of Panama didn't just mix species, it rerouted ocean currents, triggering the ice ages that would later expose Beringia and Doggerland. It's a reminder that Earth systems are interconnected in ways we're still unraveling. Every time a plate shifts or a continent drifts, it sets off a chain reaction, echoing through millions of years of history. So the next time you feel solid ground beneath your feet, remember, it's not as permanent as it seems. The planet is always moving, always changing, and beneath today's familiar maps lie the ghosts of forgotten connections. Humanity's greatest adventures didn't start with ships or planes. They began with footsteps on land we can no longer see. Those vanished bridges weren't just geological accidents. They were the superhighways of the ancient world, guiding our ancestors into every corner of the globe. Take the first Homo sapiens who ventured out of Africa around 60,000 years ago. They didn't just wander aimlessly, they followed coastlines and river valleys that led them straight to land bridges, like stepping stones across the planet. One of their earliest routes, the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a narrow passage between Africa and Arabia that, during ice ages, shrank to a shallow crossing dotted with islands. Today, it's a deep channel, but back then, it was a gateway, one that opened the door to Asia, Europe, and beyond. What's astonishing is how much we can reconstruct from fragments. A stone tool found in a cave in Oman matches ones from East Africa, left behind by the same groups who crossed when sea levels were lower. Geneticists trace these journeys through mitochondrial DNA, uncovering lineages like haplogroup L3, which spread like wildfire from Africa into the Arabian Peninsula. These aren't just abstract data points, they're breadcrumbs leading back to real people, families who carried children across landscapes we'd now need a boat to navigate. Then there's the saga of Sahol, the ancient supercontinent that joined Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania. To reach it, early humans had to cross Wallacea, a chain of islands that even during ice ages required short sea voyages, some of humanity's first intentional ocean crossings. Archaeologists debate how they did it. Were they swept there by storms, or did they build rafts to follow migrating birds? Either way, their arrival around 65,000 years ago left an indelible mark. Rock shelters in northern Australia preserve ochre paintings and grinding stones from these first arrivals, while genetic studies reveal Aboriginal Australians as one of the oldest continuous cultures on Earth, their ancestors having walked and paddled across a world now lost to the waves. But land bridges didn't just move people, they shaped cultures. The submerged continental shelf off India's west coast, known as the Maury Land, may explain why tools in India and Arabia share striking similarities. Were these separate inventions or evidence of a coastal highway where ideas spread as easily as people? Even languages hold clues. The distribution of Austronesian tongues from Madagascar to Easter Island mirrors the paths of ancient migrations across land bridges and island chains, a linguistic echo of footsteps on forgotten soil. The irony is that these bridges, so vital to our past, became their own undoing. As populations grew and climates shifted, the very routes that brought people together often vanished, stranding communities in isolation. The Yagan people of Tierra del Fuego, for instance, descend from groups who crossed the now-drowned land bridge connecting South America to the Antarctic Peninsula over 10,000 years ago. When the seas rose, they adapted to a world of canoe-based living, their history a testament to human resilience in the face of geological change. Today, we're left with puzzles written in DNA, tools, and stories. When Indigenous Australians speak of a time when the land stretched farther, or when Cherokee elders tell of ancestors arriving from across the water, they're not just sharing myths, they're preserving memories of real landscapes, real journeys. Science is finally catching up, using sonar and sediment cores to map these ghostly highways, proving that the borders we take for granted between continents, between peoples, are far more fluid than they appear. The next time you look at a map, try this. Imagine the seas a few hundred feet lower, and suddenly the world feels smaller, tighter, and brimming with possibilities. Our ancestors didn't see oceans as barriers, they saw them as doors, waiting for the right moment to open. Imagine a world where 12-foot-tall ground sloths lumbered across grasslands, where saber-toothed cats stalked herds of mammoths, and packs of dire wolves hunted prey the size of small cars. These weren't isolated ecosystems, they were interconnected by land bridges that turned entire continents into a single, sprawling megafauna marketplace. When Beringia emerged during the Ice Ages, it wasn't just humans who seized the opportunity. Creatures as small as Arctic foxes and as massive as woolly rhinoceroses marched across these frozen highways, reshaping ecosystems wherever they went. The fossil record tells a dramatic tale of these migrations. In the La Brea tar pits of Los Angeles, skeletons of dire wolves, larger and more robust than modern gray wolves, lie tangled with the bones of camels, a species that originally evolved in North America before crossing into Asia via Beringia. Meanwhile, in South America's Patagonia region, scientists have unearthed fossils of hippo-like toxodons, animals that somehow made the journey north when the Isthmus of Panama rose from the sea. These weren't random dispersals, they were carefully orchestrated invasions, with predators following prey across land bridges like shadows. But the bridges giveth, and the bridges taketh away. When rising seas severed these connections, the consequences were catastrophic. Take the case of the American cheetah, a sleek predator that once chased pronghorn antelope across North America's plains. Isolated from its relatives in the Old World, it evolved into a distinct species only to vanish entirely around 12,000 years ago when climate shifts and human hunting disrupted its shrinking territory. Similarly, the giant short-faced bear, a behemoth that could stand 15 feet tall on its hind legs, once roamed from Alaska to Mexico. Stranded by rising waters and dwindling prey, it became a relic of a lost era. The most haunting evidence of these lost highways lies beneath the waves. Off the coast of Florida, divers have found mastodon teeth and giant ground sloth bones embedded in the seafloor, remnants of a time when the continental shelf was dry land. In the North Sea, fishermen still haul up woolly mammoth tusks polished by centuries of currents, ghostly souvenirs from Doggerland's vanished savannas. Even more astonishing are the so-called stilt-legged horses of Beringia, a species adapted to snowy terrain whose fossils appear on both sides of the now flooded strait, proving how freely life moved when the continents were linked. What's heartbreaking is how many of these species never stood a chance once their bridges disappeared. The pygmy mammoths of California's Channel Islands, for example, were descendants of mainland Colombian mammoths that swam to the islands when sea levels were lower. Over generations, they shrank to a fraction of their ancestors' size, an evolutionary response to limited resources. But when humans arrived by boat, these dwarfed giants had nowhere left to retreat. Their tiny bones, some no larger than a cow's, now serve as silent testimony to the fragility of island ecosystems cut off from the world. Yet the legacy of these megafauna highways lives on in unexpected ways. The pronghorn antelope, North America's fastest land animal, can still outrun any living predator, a holdover from when it had to escape American cheetahs. And the tangled family trees of modern elephants, whose ancestors crossed land bridges multiple times, remind us that evolution never operates in isolation. Even today, as scientists debate reviving extinct species through genetic engineering, they're grappling with a fundamental question: can we ever truly restore ecosystems that relied on connections now buried beneath the waves? The answer, like the land bridges themselves, may lie just out of reach, waiting for the next tide of discovery to reveal it. Alfred Russel Wallace was knee-deep in the jungles of the Malay archipelago in the 1850s when he noticed something bizarre. On one side of an invisible boundary, he found tigers, rhinos, and monkeys, classic Asian animals. Just a short boat ride away, on islands like Lombok and Sulawesi, the wildlife looked like it belonged on another planet: kangaroos, cockatoos, and egg-laying mammals called echidnas. It was as if someone had drawn a line across the ocean, separating two completely different worlds. This invisible barrier would later bear his name, the Wallace Line, and it holds the key to one of evolution's greatest puzzles: why some animals spread across land bridges while others hit an impassable wall. What Wallace couldn't have known at the time was that this line traces the edges of ancient continents. Deep underwater, massive trenches some over 20,000 feet deep have existed for tens of millions of years. Even during ice ages, when sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet, these trenches acted like moats, too vast for land bridges to span. Asia's placental mammals, creatures like deer and squirrels that nourish their young in the womb, simply couldn't cross. Meanwhile, Australia's marsupials, with their pouches and unique evolutionary quirks, evolved in isolation, untouched by the competition that reshaped ecosystems elsewhere. The Wallace Line isn't just a neat geographic quirk, it's a living laboratory for understanding how chance and geography shape life. Take the humble shrew. In Borneo, just west of the line, you'll find typical shrews, tiny and placental. Cross to Sulawesi, and suddenly you're in the territory of the bizarre Sulawesi shrew, a marsupial that looks similar but carries its babies in a pouch. These two creatures are a textbook example of convergent evolution, nature arriving at the same solution twice because the Wallace Line kept their ancestors apart. But the line isn't perfectly rigid. Occasionally, a few brave species slipped through. The ancestors of modern rats, for instance, somehow rafted across the divide on floating vegetation, colonizing Australia long before humans arrived. Even more astonishing are the primates of Sulawesi macaques that must have crossed open water, since no land bridge ever connected their island to Asia. These exceptions prove the rule. The Wallace Line wasn't an absolute barrier, but a filter, letting through only the luckiest or most adaptable species. Today, scientists use Wallace's discovery to explain more than just animal distributions. The line also marks a cultural divide. Indigenous Australians, who arrived via ancient land bridges to the south, developed technologies and traditions distinct from their Southeast Asian neighbors, partly because the deep trenches limited contact. Even languages tell the story. Austronesian tongues spread like wildfire through islands west of the line, but hit a wall where the trenches begin. What's truly humbling is how this invisible boundary, shaped by tectonic forces millions of years ago, still dictates life today. The Komodo dragon, Earth's largest lizard, exists only on a handful of islands just east of the line, a relic of a time when lower sea levels exposed more land. Had those trenches been shallower, Australia might have tigers and Asia could have kangaroos. Wallace's line reminds us that evolution isn't just about survival of the fittest, it's about who gets a road to travel and who finds the bridge forever out of reach. Diving into the shallow waters off the coast of Alabama, scientists made a startling discovery: an ancient cypress forest, perfectly preserved beneath the Gulf of Mexico. The trees, some over 50,000 years old, still stand upright, their bark intact, their roots clutching soil that hasn't seen sunlight since the last ice age. This isn't some lonely anomaly. It's one of countless submerged forests scattered across the globe, each a time capsule from a world that vanished beneath rising seas. These drowned woodlands aren't just relics, they're living laboratories, revealing how entire ecosystems thrived on land bridges before the oceans reclaimed them. Take the Baltic Sea's ghost forest, where divers navigate a labyrinth of oak and pine stumps dating back 9,000 years. The trees' growth rings tell a story of abrupt climate change, years of healthy growth suddenly compressed into narrow bands, as if the trees were gasping for survival. Nearby, layers of peat contain pollen from plants that once carpeted Doggerland, proof that this wasn't just a sparse woodland but a mosaic of marshes, meadows, and dense thickets. Even more haunting are the footprints preserved in submerged mudflats, human and animal tracks frozen in time, capturing moments when a family paused by a lakeshore or a deer fled from predators, unaware their world was about to drown. The real treasure lies in the details. In Florida's underwater sinkholes called blue holes, explorers have found intact leaves from holly and willow trees, their veins still visible after millennia. These aren't fossils, they're actual organic material, preserved by the oxygen-starved water that slows decay to a crawl. Meanwhile, off Australia's northern coast, sonar has revealed the outline of a vast river system, its channels lined with charcoal from ancient fires set by Aboriginal peoples to manage the landscape. These fragments paint a picture not of untamed wilderness but of carefully tended ecosystems, shaped by human hands long before the seas rose. What's revolutionary is how these submerged landscapes are rewriting our understanding of coastal resilience. The peat bogs found beneath the North Sea, for instance, acted like sponges, absorbing floodwaters and stabilizing the land, a natural defense system against rising seas. Modern experiments show that restoring similar wetlands could protect cities like New Orleans or Jakarta from storm surges, mimicking the very ecosystems we've lost. Even the tree stumps serve a purpose. Their roots stabilized sediment, preventing erosion in ways that modern seawalls struggle to replicate. It's a bitter irony. The solutions to our climate crisis might lie buried beneath the waves, in the very places we once called home. Yet these drowned forests hold warnings too. Core samples from the English Channel reveal layers of sand sandwiched between peat, evidence of catastrophic storms that battered Doggerland's coasts as ice sheets melted. Parallels to today are unnerving. As modern sea levels rise, we're seeing similar patterns of erosion and saltwater intrusion in places like Louisiana's bayous. The difference: when Doggerland flooded, its inhabitants could retreat inland. Today, with coastal cities and infrastructure locked in place, we don't have that luxury. Perhaps the most poignant discoveries are the ones that blur the line between past and present. In the Pacific Northwest, indigenous tribes have long spoken of a time when their ancestors could walk to islands now separated by water. In 2014, Geologists confirmed their oral histories, finding cedar trees with stone tools embedded in their trunks, submerged in a bay that was dry land when the tools were left there. These aren't just scientific curiosities, they're bridges between knowledge systems, proving that the stories of land bridges live on in the memories of those whose ancestors crossed them. As we grapple with rising seas today, these sunken worlds remind us that change is inevitable, but so is adaptation. The question is, what will we choose to preserve before the waters rise again? The disappearance of land bridges wasn't always a slow, creeping process sometimes. It happened in the blink of geological time with catastrophic force. Picture a wall of water taller than a skyscraper, roaring across a landscape with enough power to strip away entire forests and reshape coastlines in a single day. Events like these didn't just erase land bridges, they rewrote the rules of survival for every living thing caught in their path. Take the Zanclean megaflood, a disaster so immense it turned the Mediterranean Sea from a dry basin into the vast blue expanse we know today. 5 million years ago, the Atlantic Ocean breached the Gibraltar Strait, unleashing a torrent that refilled the Mediterranean in less than 2 years, a geological heartbeat. What had been a land bridge linking Europe and Africa became a swirling chasm, cutting off migrations and isolating species on either side with terrifying speed. But water wasn't the only force at work. Beneath the ocean floor, landslides the size of countries could trigger tsunamis capable of finishing what rising seas had started. Around 8,100 years ago, off the coast of Norway, a section of continental shelf the size of Iceland, known as the Storegga Slide, collapsed into the abyss. The resulting waves, some estimates suggest as high as 80 feet, would have slammed into Doggerland's remaining settlements, drowning forests, sweeping away camps, and leaving survivors scrambling for higher ground. Archaeologists find clues to this catastrophe in layers of sand buried deep in North Sea sediment, sandwiched between peat, a silent testament to the day the sea fought back. These sudden collapses weren't just geological drama, they were evolutionary crucibles, creatures that could adapt to rapid change, like the red deer that learned to swim longer distances as Doggerland fractured into islands passed their genes forward. Others, like the mammoth stranded on shrinking landmasses, faced dead ends. For humans, these disasters may have been the ultimate test of ingenuity. Imagine a community waking to the sound of distant thunder, only to realize the horizon itself was moving, a wall of water bearing down on their home. Those who survived likely did so by reading the land in ways we can barely fathom, interpreting animal behavior, shifts in wind, or even dreams as warnings. The legacy of these catastrophes lingers in our myths. Flood stories, from Noah's Ark to the epic of Gilgamesh, echo across cultures, perhaps distant memories of lands swallowed by the sea. Even Plato's tale of Atlantis, written thousands of years after the Storegga Slide, describes an advanced civilization vanishing beneath the waves in a single day. Could these stories be garbled retellings of real events passed down through generations? It's a tantalizing thought, especially when divers off the coast of India's Gujarat have found what appear to be submerged city walls, dating to a time when sea levels were dramatically lower. What's chilling is how these ancient disasters mirror threats we face today. As glaciers melt and permafrost thaws, modern landslides like the one that triggered Alaska's 2015 Ton Fjord tsunami, a wave taller than the Statue of Liberty, remind us that Earth's plumbing hasn't changed. The difference today, billions live on coastlines that were once dynamic frontiers, where land bridges rose and fell with the climate's whims. The past teaches us that change isn't always gradual. Sometimes it arrives in a single, devastating wave. But it also shows us resilience, proving that life, whether human or animal, finds a way to navigate even the most shattered landscapes. The same forces that once revealed vast land bridges now threaten to redraw our coastlines in ways we're only beginning to grasp. While the ice ages exposed continental shelves by locking away ocean water in glaciers, today's warming climate is doing the opposite, pouring that water back into the seas at an unprecedented pace. Satellite measurements show global sea levels rising nearly twice as fast as they did just 30 years ago, with some projections suggesting we could see another 2 to 7 feet of increase by the century's end. That might not sound like enough to recreate a Beringia or Doggerland, but consider this. Just 3 feet of rise would permanently flood the homes of over 100 million people worldwide from Miami to Mumbai. What makes these modern changes different is their speed. When Beringia disappeared, sea levels rose about 1 foot every 100 years, fast enough to reshape coastlines over generations, but slow enough for ecosystems and human communities to adapt. Today, some coastal areas are seeing that same amount of rise in a single decade. The implications are staggering. Places like Louisiana's wetlands, already disappearing at the rate of a football field every 100 minutes, show us how quickly land can vanish when rising seas meet soft sediment. Meanwhile, in the Pacific, entire island nations face existential threats. The Marshall Islands could lose nearly half their territory by the end of the century, forcing difficult questions about sovereignty and cultural survival when your homeland literally slips beneath the waves. Yet the parallels between past and present offer unexpected insights. Ancient shell middens piles of discarded seafood that mark prehistoric coastal settlements now lie submerged far offshore, showing exactly where shorelines stood when sea levels were lower. Archaeologists use these as roadmaps to predict which modern areas might flood first, since human settlements have always clustered near productive coastal zones. Even more telling are the mangrove forests found fossilized beneath current sea levels. These salt-tolerant trees once formed natural barriers against storms, just as they do today. Their ancient roots, preserved in mud layers, reveal how quickly coastal ecosystems can migrate landward when given space, a lesson for modern conservationists working to create living shorelines as alternatives to concrete seawalls. The most urgent warning from vanished land bridges isn't just about flooding, it's about fragmentation. When Doggerland drowned, it didn't just displace hunter-gatherers, it severed connections between European ecosystems, isolating species and reshaping biodiversity patterns that persist to this day. We're seeing similar disruptions now. The Everglades freshwater marshes, already pressured by development, face saltwater intrusion that could permanently alter this unique ecosystem. In Bangladesh, rising seas are pushing saltwater into rice paddies, threatening both food supplies and the delicate balance between freshwater and marine species. These aren't just local problems, they're threads unraveling from a global tapestry of interconnected habitats. Perhaps the most profound lesson lies in human adaptation. The same genetic studies that trace ancient migrations across land bridges also reveal how populations weathered climate shifts. Some groups thrived by developing new technologies, like the sophisticated fish traps found in submerged Australian sites dating back 7,000 years. Others shifted lifestyles entirely, like the Jomon people of Japan, who transitioned from land-based hunting to deep-sea fishing as rising seas transformed their landscape. These aren't ancient curiosities, they're case studies in resilience, proving that flexibility, not just physical barriers, determines who survives environmental change. As we face our own era of rising seas, the ghostly outlines of lost land bridges serve as both warning and guide. They remind us that coastlines have always been dynamic frontiers where land and water dance to the rhythm of Earth's climate. The difference this time, we're not passive observers of this change, but active participants. The decisions we make about emissions, development, and conservation will determine whether future archaeologists study our coastal cities as modern Doggerlands or as examples of how humanity learned to navigate the tides of change. One thing is certain, the oceans are rising, and like our ancestors before us, we'll need to decide whether to retreat, adapt, or build new bridges to higher ground. The line between myth and geology blurs where land bridges meet human history. Unlike the fantastical spires of Atlantis, described by Plato as a glittering metropolis swallowed by the sea, land bridges were entirely natural products of shifting ice and sea levels. Yet when ancient peoples built their homes on these temporary landscapes, the rising waters didn't just erase land. They drowned entire chapters of human experience, leaving behind tantalizing clues that dance between science and legend. Take the Yonaguni Monument, a series of massive stone terraces submerged off Japan's coast. Some researchers point to its right angles and stepped platforms as evidence of an ancient city, perhaps built by the same Jomon culture that left stone circles on dry land. Others argue it's simply an unusually geometric sandstone formation, shaped by tides and tectonic activity. The truth might lie somewhere in between, natural features modified by human hands, like a quarry or ceremonial site later claimed by the sea. Similar debates surround India's Gulf of Combat, where sonar images reveal grid-like patterns and pottery fragments nearly 9,000 years old, suggesting settlements that thrived when the ocean floor was dry land. What makes these sites so captivating is how they mirror the stories passed down through generations. The Welsh legend of Cantref Gwaelod, a fertile kingdom lost to floods, aligns with geological evidence of submerged forests in Cardigan Bay. Aboriginal tales of the Dreaming Tracks describe walking routes now underwater, matching Ice Age coastline maps. These aren't mere coincidences, they're cultural memories preserved in oral traditions long after the landscapes that inspired them vanished. The real magic happens when archaeology catches up to legend. In 2021, divers exploring a sinkhole in Florida's Osceola River found a butchered mastodon bone alongside stone tools, proving humans lived on land now 60 feet underwater at least 14,000 years ago. Meanwhile, off Denmark's coast, fishermen's nets have hauled up Mesolithic spears and bone fishhooks from drowned hunting camps. Each discovery stitches another patch onto the quilt of human prehistory, showing how our ancestors adapted to and ultimately fled rising seas. Yet the greatest mystery isn't what we've found, but what remains hidden. Satellite scans suggest over 2,000 potential archaeological sites lie submerged along North America's continental shelves, from Chesapeake Bay to the Pacific Northwest. Some could rewrite timelines like the proposed Beringian standstill theory, which suggests humans lived for millennia on the now drowned edges of Beringia before venturing into the Americas. Others might reveal entirely unknown cultures, their stories preserved not in libraries but in the silent geometry of stone circles and post holes beneath the waves. The lesson here is profound. Land bridges weren't just geological quirks but stages for human drama. Every tusk pulled from the North Sea, every hearth found beneath the Gulf of Mexico, whispers the same truth: civilization has always been a negotiation with the sea, and the tides always get the last word. Long before sonar mapped submerged river valleys or carbon dating confirmed the age of sunken tools, indigenous communities carried detailed maps of these lost landscapes in their stories. The Inuit of Alaska and Siberia tell of a time when the Bering Strait was a land where the sun set behind mountains, a description that perfectly matches reconstructions of Beringia's Ice Age terrain. In Australia's Arnhem Land, Aboriginal elders sing cycles of songs that trace coastlines now 60 feet underwater. Route maps passed down through 300 generations with astonishing accuracy. These aren't vague legends but precise geographical records, preserved through oral traditions so rigorous they rival modern scientific methods. What makes these accounts extraordinary is how they capture environmental details science struggles to reconstruct. The Tlingit people's stories describe grasslands where whales now swim, aligning with pollen studies showing Beringia's steppe vegetation. Maori oral histories mention walking routes between islands now separated by deep channels, later confirmed by bathymetric surveys revealing underwater ridges. Even the timing matches. When geneticists estimate humans first arrived in the Americas around 20,000 years ago, indigenous creation stories speak of ancestors emerging from the earth during the Great Cold, a period corresponding perfectly with the last glacial maximum. The real power of these traditions lies in their holistic perspective, where Western science might study land bridges as isolated geological events. Indigenous narratives weave together climate, ecology, and human experience. The Yupik of Alaska describe not just Beringia's existence but its smell, the scent of wet woolly mammoth fur carried on icy winds, and its sounds like the cracking of permafrost under caribou hooves. Aboriginal Australian dreaming stories explain how rising seas transformed kangaroo migration patterns, a detail ecologists have since verified through fossilized trackways. These accounts don't just tell us land bridges existed, they reveal how it felt to live on them, yet for centuries colonial scholars dismissed such knowledge as myth. Only when divers found ancient stonefish traps exactly where oral histories placed them, or when DNA proved indigenous groups carried unique adaptations for Arctic conditions developed over millennia, did researchers fully grasp these traditions' precision. The irony is profound. Modern science needed submarines and satellites to confirm what grandmothers had been teaching grandchildren around campfires for generations. Today, this fusion of indigenous knowledge and Western archaeology is rewriting history books. In Canada's Haida-Gwaii archipelago, elders guided researchers to submerged village sites using phrases like, "where the waves meet the old creek," leading to the discovery of 14,000-year-old spear points. In the Torres Strait, traditional songs about the land beyond the reef helped locate a drowned cultural landscape now protected as an underwater heritage site. These partnerships prove that understanding land bridges requires both ice core samples and the memories of those whose ancestors watched them vanish. The most poignant lesson comes from communities facing rising seas today. When Kiribati Islanders speak of their homeland's inevitable drowning, they don't frame it as a future crisis but as the latest chapter in an ancient story of adaptation, one their oral traditions have prepared them for. Like the Wampanoag of Massachusetts, who still harvest shellfish from stone weirs built when sea levels were lower, they remind us that land bridges aren't just relics of the past but metaphors for resilience. The waters will rise again, they say, but the stories will remain, guiding the way to whatever shores come next. Beneath the churning waves of the North Sea, a team of researchers aboard a research vessel watches as their multi-beam sonar paints a ghostly image on their screens, a vast river valley winding across what was once Doggerland's sunlit plains. 20,000 years ago, this underwater canyon pulsed with life, families gathering freshwater mussels from its banks, herds of aurochs stampeding through its floodplains, canoes gliding along its currents. Today, this lost world exists only as data points and digital reconstructions, pieced together by technology our ancestors could never have imagined. The revolution in underwater archaeology isn't just about better tools, it's about seeing the invisible. Satellite-based LiDAR, originally designed to map forest canopies, now scans shallow seabeds, revealing human-made mounds and animal trails preserved like fingerprints in the silt. In the Baltic, side-scan sonar has pinpointed perfectly preserved fishing weirs made of woven branches, their intricate knots still intact after millennia. Even humble sediment cores tell epic stories. When scientists drilled into the floor of the Persian Gulf, they found layers of freshwater snail shells sandwiched between marine deposits, proof that this was once a fertile river delta, not the salty expanse we know today. Perhaps the most astonishing breakthroughs come from biomolecular archaeology. By analyzing ancient DNA trapped in seafloor sediment, researchers can reconstruct entire ecosystems from microscopic fragments. In 2022, a team studying the Bering seafloor identified genetic traces of woolly mammoths, steppe bison, and even humans, all from a single scoop of mud. Meanwhile, isotopic analysis of submerged peat bogs reveals climate fluctuations that forced migration, showing exactly when once hospitable valleys became salt marshes. These aren't just snapshots of the past, they're time-lapse videos of Earth's transformation. The real game-changer collaboration. Projects like Europe's Lost Frontiers combine geophysics with anthropology, letting archaeologists walk through digital reconstructions of Doggerland using VR headsets. They've mapped not just terrain but cultural hotspots, places where concentrations of flint tools suggest trading posts, or where aligned deer bones hint at ceremonial sites. Off Australia's northwest coast, Indigenous rangers work alongside marine geologists, matching sonar images of submerged freshwater springs with oral histories that describe their exact locations. What emerges is a humbling truth: our ancestors were far more connected than we realized. A stone tool found in a drowned Mexican cave matches artifacts from Clovis culture, suggesting coastal migrations bypassed icy inland corridors. In the Pacific, simulations of ancient currents show how early seafarers might have ridden kelp highways, floating mats of seaweed that stretched from Japan to California, guiding boats along fertile coastal shelves now underwater. Even the humble sweet potato tells a tale. Its DNA traces journeys across now vanished island chains, proving that Polynesians and South Americans met long before Europeans arrived. Yet for all our technology, mysteries remain. Why are there clusters of mammoth bones near underwater thermal springs in the English Channel? Did humans drive them there, or was it some quirk of geology? And what explains the circular stone structures off India's Tamil Nadu coast, ceremonial enclosures, or something else entirely? Every answered question unveils 10 more, a reminder that the oceans guard their secrets fiercely. The most profound revelation isn't about the past, but the future. As melting glaciers expose Alaskan caves once sealed by ice, archaeologists rush to recover artifacts before rising seas claim them again. In Florida, teams document ancient shoreline campsites that mirror areas currently threatened by erosion, a stark warning about cycles of loss and resilience. These submerged landscapes aren't just relics, they're mirrors, showing us what happens when land and water wage their eternal tug of war. And as the sonar pings and sediment cores keep whispering their secrets, one thing becomes clear: the story of humanity isn't just written on dry land. It's hidden in the silent darkness below, waiting for the right technology and the right questions to bring it back to light. Science thrives on debate, and the story of land bridges is no exception. While the broad strokes are clear, ice ages exposed land, humans and animals crossed, rising seas erased the paths. The devil is in the details. Take Beringia. Textbooks often depict early humans trudging across a frozen highway, but some archaeologists now argue that coastal migration played a far bigger role. Imagine small groups paddling skin boats along ice-free corridors, hopping between islands that once dotted the now submerged coastline. This kelp highway theory gains traction from tools found on islands like California's Channel Islands, far older than inland sites, suggesting some arrivals bypassed the interior entirely. The timeline of Doggerland's drowning is another battleground. Traditional models place its final disappearance around 8,000 years ago, but recent core samples hint at a more complex story. Layers of sand in North Sea sediment suggest catastrophic floods, possibly from glacial lake outbursts that could have shattered the landscape in bursts, not centuries. Some researchers even propose that survivors of these floods carried their trauma into folklore, inspiring flood myths across Europe. Meanwhile, a vocal minority argues Doggerland clung to life as isolated islands longer than assumed, pointing to Neolithic artifacts dredged from the seafloor that seem too young to fit the standard timeline. Then there's the Solutrean hypothesis, perhaps the most contentious idea of all. A handful of scholars claim stone tools in the eastern United States resemble those made by Ice Age Europeans, suggesting a transatlantic migration via an ice edge route long before Beringia's heyday. Most geneticists dismiss this indigenous American DNA shows no European links that early, but the debate underscores how land bridge research can upend conventional narratives. Even the Wallace Line has its skeptics. New genetic studies show some marsupials crossed deep trenches on floating vegetation, proving nature's rule breakers always find a way. What keeps these controversies alive isn't stubbornness, it's the tantalizing gaps in the record. A single discovery, like the 23,000-year-old human footprints found in New Mexico, can rewrite human migration timelines overnight. Underwater archaeology's limitations fuel the fire. Less than 5% of the world's continental shelves have been surveyed, leaving room for game-changing finds. The real takeaway: land bridges weren't static sidewalks but dynamic stages where climate, geography, and human ingenuity collided in ways we're still deciphering. Every fresh clue, whether a DNA sample or a sonar anomaly, reminds us that Earth's lost highways still have stories left to tell. Stories of lost lands and catastrophic floods echo through the oral traditions of nearly every coastal culture on Earth, as if humanity collectively remembers a time when the maps of our ancestors looked radically different. The Kumari Kandam legend, cherished in Tamil Nadu, describes a sprawling continent south of India that vanished beneath the waves, a tale long dismissed as fantasy until marine archaeologists discovered submerged river channels and ancient settlements off the coast. Similarly, the Haida people of the Pacific Northwest tell of Raven guiding their ancestors across a land bridge that once connected islands now separated by miles of open ocean, a narrative that aligns uncannily with geological evidence of lowered sea levels during the Ice Age. These myths share more than just thematic similarities. They often pinpoint specific locations where science later confirms land bridges existed. Take the biblical account of Noah's flood, which scholars now link to the sudden inundation of the Black Sea around 7,600 years ago. When glacial meltwater breached the Bosporus Strait, it unleashed a deluge that raised sea levels by hundreds of feet within months, drowning Neolithic villages along the shores. Fishermen in the region still occasionally haul up stone tools and pottery from the seafloor, silent witnesses to a catastrophe so profound it seared itself into cultural memory across generations. What's fascinating is how these stories encode environmental details with startling accuracy. The Aboriginal Dreamtime story of the Gulf of Carpentaria describes a time when freshwater lakes stretched to the horizon, a landscape now confirmed by core samples showing ancient shorelines nearly 200 feet below current sea levels. The Norse myth of Ragnarok, with its great serpent writhing as the seas rise, mirrors the Storiga slide tsunami that ravaged Doggerland. Even Plato's account of Atlantis sinking in a single day and night finds eerie parallels in the rapid collapses of land bridges like Sundaland, where rising seas could have swallowed coastal plains within human lifetimes. But these tales aren't just geological records, they're survival guides. The Klamath people of Oregon recount how their ancestors survived a great flood by retreating to Mount Shasta, a lesson that would have been vital during periods of rapid sea level rise. In the Philippines, the Ifugao epic Hudhud describes building terraces to stabilize hillsides against erosion, a technique still used today in areas vulnerable to flooding. These narratives didn't just explain the past, they equipped future generations to face similar crises. The most haunting connections emerge when science and tradition collide. On Australia's northern coast, archaeologists found ancient stone fish traps exactly where Indigenous songlines said they would be, now submerged in 30 feet of water. In the Baltic, divers located a 9,000-year-old antler carving depicting an elk, matching petroglyphs left by descendants who migrated inland as Doggerland flooded. These aren't coincidences, they're proof that oral histories preserved precise memories across hundreds of generations, outlasting the very landscapes that birthed them. Yet mysteries linger. Why do so many flood myths feature divine warnings like the Hindu god Vishnu manifesting as a fish to alert Manu of the coming deluge, when geological evidence suggests most land bridge drownings were gradual? Perhaps these stories compress generations of coastal retreat into single dramatic events, or maybe they reflect the human need to find meaning in catastrophe. Either way, they remind us that land bridges didn't just vanish from maps, they left scars on the collective psyche of every culture that watched the waters rise. Today, as climate change reshapes our coastlines, these ancient narratives feel newly urgent. They teach us that environmental upheaval isn't an anomaly but a recurring chapter in Earth's story, one that demands both resilience and remembrance. The next time you hear a flood myth, listen closely. Beneath the symbolism and sacred imagery, you might just catch the whisper of waves swallowing a world we once called home. Off the coast of Malta, beneath the turquoise waves of the Mediterranean, divers made a discovery that rewrote history. A labyrinth of massive stone structures, ruts carved into bedrock, circular foundations, and monoliths weighing tons, all lying 60 feet underwater. This wasn't random debris, it was a sprawling prehistoric complex now called the Maltese Atlantis, dating back over 5,000 years. The sheer scale suggests an organized society, one that thrived on land now swallowed by the sea. But here's the twist. These temples predate Egypt's pyramids by centuries, proving that advanced cultures were grappling with rising waters long before we imagined. What makes these underwater ruins so extraordinary isn't just their age, but their preservation. Saltwater acted like a time capsule, safeguarding organic materials that would have vanished on land. In one submerged chamber, archaeologists found charred seeds and animal bones, the remnants of ancient feasts still resting where they'd been placed millennia ago. Nearby, a stone altar bore carvings of spirals and bulls, motifs echoed in later Minoan and Greek art, hinting at cultural connections lost to the waves. The real shock came when sonar revealed the structures weren't isolated. They were part of a network with pathways linking what were once hilltops but are now seamounts. This wasn't just a village, it was a ritual landscape carefully planned and now frozen in its moment of drowning. Half a world away, in Florida's Osceola River, scientists uncovered a different kind of treasure, a butchered mastodon femur alongside a stone knife, resting in a sinkhole that was once a freshwater spring. The bones bore precise cut marks, evidence of human activity dating back 14,000 years, older than any known Clovis sites in North America. This single artifact appended theories about how and when humans first reached the continent, suggesting some may have skirted coastlines now underwater, exploiting land bridges we're only beginning to map. But perhaps the most haunting finds come from Denmark's lost Doggerland settlements. Fishermen trawling the North Sea have hauled up not just tools but intimate objects: a child's wooden doll, a finely carved antler hammer, even a bundle of wild wheat stalks tied with twine, someone's unfinished meal from 8,000 years ago. These aren't just relics, they're frozen moments, offering glimpses of daily life in a world that vanished beneath the waves. Advanced imaging techniques now reveal entire ghost fields of submerged forests, their stumps still standing in neat rows, as if the farmers who tended them might return any moment. The implications are staggering. Each discovery chips away at the notion that prehistoric societies were simple or isolated. The Maltese temples suggest spiritual sophistication. The oscilla knife points to unsuspected migration routes. The Doggerland artifacts reveal domesticity and trade networks spanning vanished landscapes. Together, they paint a picture of resilience of cultures adapting to changing coasts, then slipping beneath the waves, their stories waiting for us to piece them back together. Yet for every answer, these finds pose new questions. Why were some structures, like Malta's temples, deliberately built in areas prone to flooding? Did they hold ceremonial significance tied to water, or were their builders unaware of the rising threat? And how many more sites lie undiscovered, hidden under silt or coral, their secrets preserved by the very seas that claimed them? With climate change accelerating coastal erosion, the race is on to document these fragile time capsules before they're lost again, this time for good. What emerges from the murky depths isn't just a collection of artifacts, but a reminder: civilization has always been a dance with the ocean, a push and pull of settlement and retreat. The next time you dip your toes in the sea, remember, you're standing on the rooftops of drowned worlds, where every grain of sand might hold a story older than history itself. The ocean floor remains one of the last great frontiers of exploration, and the secrets of lost land bridges are just beginning to surface. Cutting-edge technology is transforming how we study these drowned worlds. Autonomous underwater drones equipped with high-resolution sonar can now map entire submerged river systems in days, not years. In the Gulf of Mexico, researchers are preparing to deploy robotic submersibles to investigate a series of underwater sinkholes nicknamed blue holes, where fresh water once pooled during the last ice age. These natural time capsules could preserve organic materials like wooden tools or even woven baskets, materials that rarely survive on land. Meanwhile, off Australia's northwest coast, a team is using laser spectrometry to analyze submerged cave walls for traces of ancient pigments, hoping to find rock art left by the first people to navigate these now flooded shores. But the real game changer lies in biomolecular archaeology. Scientists can now extract human and animal DNA from seafloor sediment, even without bones or artifacts. A single teaspoon of mud from the North Sea might contain genetic echoes of Doggerland's last inhabitants, their dietary habits, their pathogens, even the plants they cultivated. Projects like Europe's Submerged Landscapes initiative are creating detailed paleo-environmental maps, reconstructing everything from forest composition to seasonal migration routes based on microscopic pollen and algae fossils. These aren't just academic exercises, they're rewinding the clock on human resilience, showing how communities adapted to catastrophic environmental change. The most ambitious endeavor, a proposed international effort to core drill the Bering seafloor, targeting layers deposited when Beringia was dry land. By analyzing ancient soil samples, researchers hope to pinpoint exact routes early humans took, whether they hugged coastlines or trekked inland, and what ecological pressures shaped their journeys. Similar projects in Southeast Asia aim to solve the Sundaland paradox: why some groups ventured across open ocean to Australia, while others remained on land that would soon vanish. The answers could rewrite our understanding of risk, innovation, and what drives human expansion. Yet challenges loom. Deep-sea archaeology is exponentially more difficult and costly than terrestrial digs. Strong currents, sediment shifts, and the sheer vastness of search areas mean discoveries often rely on luck as much as technology. There's also the ethical dimension. Many submerged sites hold cultural significance for indigenous communities, requiring collaborations that respect oral histories as valid data. In Alaska, Tlingit elders recently helped scientists locate a 13,000-year-old fishing camp by interpreting ancestral stories about the place where the land tilted, a reference to post-glacial rebound. What keeps researchers pushing forward is the tantalizing possibility of a paradigm-shifting find. Imagine uncovering a preserved settlement beneath the Persian Gulf, where some scholars believe early humans thrived before being displaced by rising seas around 8,000 years ago. Or retrieving a carved totem from Doggerland's drowned forests, offering the first direct glimpse of its people's spiritual world. Even seemingly small discoveries, a child's footprint in hardened mud, a charred seed from an ancient meal, can humanize these lost landscapes in ways textbooks never could. The next decade promises unprecedented access to our planet's submerged past. Satellite-based bathymetry is revealing hidden topographic features daily, while AI sifts through sonar data to flag potential human-made structures. Private-public partnerships, like one between NOAA and oceanographic institutes, are funding expeditions to previously inaccessible depths. And citizen scientists are getting involved too. Fishermen from Scotland to Indonesia now log GPS coordinates when their nets snag unusual objects, creating crowdsourced maps of potential archaeological hotspots. Perhaps the most profound lesson emerging from this research isn't about the past, but the future. As we face our own era of rising seas, understanding how ancient cultures adapted or failed to similar challenges takes on urgent relevance. The same coastal plains that hosted thriving communities 12,000 years ago are now home to megacities like Tokyo and Mumbai. By studying how land bridges vanished and societies responded, we're not just uncovering history, we're drafting a survival manual for the centuries to come. The oceans that swallowed these ancient highways may soon give up their secrets, and with them, wisdom we desperately need. Land bridges didn't just move land masses, they reshaped the very fabric of life on Earth. When continents connected, even briefly, the results were evolutionary earthquakes. Take the Great American Biotic Interchange, a monumental shuffle of species triggered by the rise of the Isthmus of Panama around 3 million years ago. Before this land bridge emerged, South America had been an island continent for tens of millions of years, incubating bizarre and wondrous creatures like giant ground sloths and armored glyptodonts the size of cars. But when the narrow strip of land linked North and South America, it became a superhighway for invasion. Saber-toothed cats like Smilodon, massive wolves, and armored bears surged south, while bizarre refugees like opossums and armadillos scurried north. This wasn't just a migration, it was a clash of ecosystems, a biological revolution written in teeth and bone. The aftermath was chaos and innovation. South America's gentle giants evolved without natural predators, faced slaughter. Fossil beds tell the grim tale. Bones of native toxodons and macrauchenias, hoofed mammals with trunks, lie punctured by the fangs of newly arrived carnivores. Yet some survivors adapted in astonishing ways. The terror birds, once apex predators, grew even more ferocious to compete with mammalian hunters. Meanwhile, North America gained evolutionary oddities like the vampire bat, whose ancestors hitched rides on the northward march of armadillos. This wasn't just species swapping places, it was nature improvising under pressure, rewriting food webs in real time. But land bridges weren't just battlegrounds, they were matchmakers for unlikely partnerships. When Beringia connected Asia and North America, it allowed grey wolves to cross into the Old World, where they eventually evolved into everything from Chihuahuas to Great Danes. Camels made the opposite journey, starting in North America before trekking to Asia and Africa, leaving behind relatives like llamas in the Andes. Even plants joined the migrations. Grass seeds lodged in mammoth fur spread across continents, transforming steppes into vast grazing highways. These connections turned isolated evolutionary experiments into global collaborations, proving that life thrives when roads open between worlds, the real surprise. How quickly these changes unfolded. Fossil records show some species colonized new continents within mere centuries of a land bridge forming. Take the humble shrew, tiny, unassuming, but a champion of land bridge travel. Multiple species radiated across Beringia in waves, their tiny teeth leaving telltale clues in sediment layers. This wasn't slow drift, it was a sprint, as if animals sensed the clock ticking before seas rose again. And rise they did. When connections drowned, stranded populations became living time capsules. Australia's marsupials, cut off by rising waters, preserved primitive traits their placental cousins elsewhere lost. Islands like Madagascar became arks for lemurs and tenrecs, oddballs that might have vanished had competition kept flowing in. Today, we see land bridges' legacy in DNA. The genes of jaguars in Mexico still carry whispers of their ancestors' epic trek from Asia across Beringia, then down the Pan-American highway. Even human genomes bear the marks. The genes helping Tibetans thrive at high altitudes trace back to Denisovans who once wandered these lost highways. It's a reminder that evolution isn't just about survival of the fittest, it's about who gets a ticket to ride when geography reshuffles the deck. And as climate change alters modern habitats, these ancient lessons feel urgent. The land bridges may be gone, but their message endures. Life never stands still. It flows, adapts, and remembers even when the roads themselves vanish beneath the waves. The lines on modern maps may seem fixed, but beneath the waves, ancient land bridges whisper a different story. One that still rattles diplomacy and fuels disputes today. Take the Bering Strait, where Russia's big domed island and Alaska's little domed stare at each other across just 2.5 miles of water. During the last ice age, this wasn't a strait at all, but the heart of Beringia, a landmass so vast it supported entire cultures. Now, that submerged connection complicates everything from oil exploration rights to indigenous hunting traditions. The Yupik people, whose ancestors freely traversed this frozen grassland, today need visas to visit relatives separated by an international border that ignores their shared history. It's a geopolitical tug of war where Ice Age geography collides with 21st century law. But the ripple effects go deeper. In the South China Sea, nations clash over islands built atop the drowned Sundaland shelf, a land bridge that once connected Southeast Asia's islands to the mainland. Satellite images show artificial islands mushrooming atop these ancient geological features, each one a strategic pawn in battles over shipping lanes and undersea oil reserves. The irony, these contested waters were once fertile valleys where early humans foraged. Now, their submerged contours determine which modern superpower controls critical trade routes. Even the legal framework is murky. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea grants economic rights based on continental shelves, effectively rewarding countries for land bridges that vanished millennia ago. Then there's Doggerland's ghost haunting Europe's energy policies. When the North Sea's oil rigs drill into sediment layers, they're tapping reservoirs that formed when this area was a sprawling wetland. Britain and Norway's maritime boundary, drawn through these underwater plains, determines billions in fossil fuel revenue, all because glacial meltwater flooded a landscape Mesolithic hunters once called home. Meanwhile, in the Arctic, receding ice is exposing new shipping routes along the same paths woolly mammoths once trampled, sparking a modern scramble for sovereignty over thawing land bridges. The most poignant conflicts arise where Indigenous rights meet submerged heritage. In Australia, Aboriginal groups use oral histories of drowned coastal plains to assert land claims, proving continuous occupation predating sea level rise. Canada's Haida Nation recently halted a submarine pipeline by demonstrating it would damage culturally significant sites on the seafloor, their ancestral villages now underwater. These aren't just legal victories, they're corrections to a historical blind spot, acknowledging that political borders shouldn't erase landscapes that shaped human survival. What emerges is a paradox. The same forces that connected continents now divide nations. As climate change unlocks the Arctic's frozen corridors, we're repeating ancient patterns, migrating, competing, and rewriting boundaries, except this time, the land bridges aren't rising. They're disappearing for good. The lesson: geology doesn't care about treaties. When the seas rise or fall, they redraw the board, leaving diplomats to play catch-up with an Earth that's always been in motion. Could another ice age bring back the lost highways of our ancestors? Picture this: glaciers creeping across continents once more, locking away seawater in towering sheets of ice, and exposing vast stretches of ocean floor we haven't walked in 12,000 years. Beringia could re-emerge, a frozen grassland bridging Russia and Alaska. Doggerland might rise from the North Sea, its buried rivers and forests breathing air again. Even the Sunda Shelf could reunite Southeast Asia's islands into a single landmass. Geologically speaking, it's entirely possible Earth's climate has always swung between ice ages and warm periods like ours. The real question isn't whether these bridges could return, but what would happen if they did. Consider the sheer scale of change required. For sea levels to drop enough to expose Beringia again, global temperatures would need to plummet, triggering a buildup of continental ice sheets. That's not a gentle shift, it's a planetary upheaval. Cities like New York and Tokyo would watch their coastlines expand by miles as waters retreated, while ports worldwide would scramble to adapt to newly stranded harbors. But here's the twist: unlike the last ice age, humans now dominate the planet. We've paved over natural coastlines, drained wetlands, and built megacities where mammoths once roamed. If Beringia reappeared tomorrow, would it be a lifeline for migration, or just another corridor for pipelines and border fences? The ecological implications are equally staggering. Land bridges act like petri dishes for evolution, shuffling species between isolated ecosystems. If Sundaland reconnected Indonesia's islands, tigers might swim to Borneo, competing with orangutans for the first time in millennia. Meanwhile, rising land could strand marine life in shrinking seas, repeating the same crises that doomed species when bridges vanished. But this time, we'd be the architects of the change. Would we reintroduce wolves to Doggerland to restore Ice Age ecosystems, or bulldoze its plains for farmland? The dilemma cuts to the core of conservation. Do we preserve the past or engineer the future? Yet the most profound shift might be cultural. For indigenous communities like the Yupik or the Haida, resurgent land bridges could mean reuniting with ancestral lands submerged for generations. Oral histories describe these lost landscapes in vivid detail: the taste of saltgrass on Beringia's plains, the sound of caribou herds crossing Doggerland's rivers. If the land returned, would it rekindle traditions severed by rising seas? Or would modern borders and property laws turn these symbolic homecomings into legal quagmires? The very idea forces us to confront how deeply geography shapes identity. Of course, the odds of another ice age arriving soon are slim. Human-caused climate change is pushing temperatures in the opposite direction. But Earth's climate has surprised us before. Some scientists speculate that melting Arctic ice could disrupt ocean currents enough to trigger regional cooling, a paradoxical effect of global warming. Even without glaciers advancing, localized sea level drops might expose fragments of forgotten bridges, offering previews of what could have been. Off the coast of the Bahamas, for instance, underwater caves preserve footprints of Lucayan people who walked there when seas were lower, proof that land bridges don't need to be continent-spanning to reshape human stories. So while we may never see mammoths trek across a resurrected Beringia, the fantasy reveals something startling about our relationship with the planet. Land bridges weren't just geological quirks, they were mirrors reflecting the best and worst of human adaptability. Their return would test whether we've learned to share the Earth or simply mastered the art of claiming it. The next time you see a map, try erasing a few hundred feet of ocean in your mind. The ghosts of old highways are still down there, waiting to ask, if the land came back, what kind of travelers would we be? Louis Agassiz, the Swiss-born scientist whose name now graces glaciers and mountain peaks, didn't set out to study land bridges, he was chasing ice. In the 1840s, his radical theory of continental glaciation shattered the scientific consensus that Earth's landscapes were shaped by biblical floods. Trekking across the jagged Alps, Agassiz documented grooves in bedrock and erratic boulders stranded far from their sources, evidence of ancient ice sheets that once sprawled across Europe. But his most prescient insight came when he noticed identical glacial scars on opposite sides of the Atlantic. Could ice have once connected these distant coasts? Though he never used the term land bridge, Agassiz's work planted the seed. Earth's surface was a palimpsest, its past written in vanished connections. Decades later, Alfred Wegener took that idea and ran with it literally. The German meteorologist's obsession with continental drift began when he spotted matching fern fossils in Brazil and Africa, like puzzle pieces ripped apart. His 1912 theory proposed that continents weren't fixed but had drifted across oceans over eons, sometimes colliding to form temporary land bridges. Critics mocked his lack of geological training, dubbing it Wegener's fairy tale. Undeterred, he embarked on grueling Greenland expeditions, measuring ice sheets as living analogues for past glaciations. Though he died in a blizzard in 1930, his notebooks contained sketches of a proto-Atlantic land bridge, later confirmed when sonar mapped the mid-Atlantic ridge. Fast forward to the 21st century, where researchers like Britain's Nick Ashton wield tools Agassiz and Wegener couldn't have imagined. On the frigid shores of the North Sea, Ashton's team sifts through sediment cores with the precision of forensic investigators, hunting for microscopic flint flakes, artifacts from Doggerland's lost inhabitants. Their secret weapon, a technique called optically stimulated luminescence, which dates ancient grains of sand by measuring when sunlight last touched them. It's revealed human footprints preserved in estuary mud for nearly 9,000 years, proof that Doggerland wasn't just a hunting ground but a home. Meanwhile, in the Alaskan tundra, geologist Julie Brigham Gret drills into permafrost, extracting ice cores that trap ancient air bubbles like time capsules. Her work proves Beringia wasn't the barren wasteland once assumed, but a grassy refuge where humans and megafauna coexisted during the Ice Age's harshest peaks. And off Australia's coast, maritime archaeologist Jonathan Benjamin dives with Indigenous rangers to map submerged freshwater springs, critical waypoints for the first people to reach Sahel. Their discoveries aren't just academic, they're rewriting Indigenous histories silenced by colonization. What unites these explorers across centuries isn't just courage, but curiosity that borders on obsession. Agassiz hauled sledges of rock samples through blizzards. Wegener risked crevasse falls to prove his theories. Ashton spends winters knee-deep in North Sea muck, chasing shadows of a drowned world. Their collective legacy reminds us that land bridges aren't just geological quirks, they're the hidden stitches in the fabric of human experience. And as climate change exposes new clues in thawing permafrost and eroding coastlines, a new generation of explorers stands ready to decode them. Land bridges have always been more than just geological features, they're storytelling gold, woven into myths, blockbusters, and dystopian novels as symbols of connection and impermanence. Think of the animated mammoth herd in Ice Age, trudging across Beringia's frozen plains, or the haunting descriptions in Alan Weisman's The World Without Us, where rising seas slowly swallow the remnants of human civilization. These narratives tap into something primal, the idea that the ground beneath our feet isn't as solid as it seems, and that the borders we take for granted between nations, between eras, are fleeting. Hollywood loves land bridges for their cinematic drama. Remember the tense crossing in 10,000 BC, where hunters brave a narrow ice corridor, or the surreal landscapes of his Dark Materials, where parallel worlds connect via Arctic passages. These scenes echo real Ice Age migrations, but they also serve as metaphors, bridges between past and present, between worlds, even between life and death. Video games like Horizon Zero Dawn take it further, rendering post-apocalyptic versions of Doggerland as lush, submerged ruins where players uncover lost histories. The message is clear: land bridges aren't just plot devices, they're mirrors reflecting our own anxieties about climate change and displacement. Literature digs even deeper. Jean M. Auel's Clan of the Cave Bear imagines Paleolithic tribes navigating Beringia's thawing tundra, their survival hinging on knowledge of vanishing trails. Kim Stanley Robinson's The Ministry for the Future projects a chilling reversal: modern engineers debating whether to rebuild land bridges by lowering sea levels, a last-ditch effort to save coastal cities. These stories blur the line between science and speculation, asking what we'd do if the past geography suddenly returned. Even children's books like The Secret of the Kelpie use submerged landscapes to teach about memory and loss, with young protagonists discovering fossilized footprints where oceans now roll. But perhaps the most poignant portrayals come from Indigenous storytellers. The Inuit legend of Sedna, the sea goddess, describes her fingers becoming seals and whales as she clings to a sinking landmass, a parable of adaptation. Maori oral histories recount Te Reo a Moi, a sunken continent whose peaks form New Zealand's islands, echoing the science of Zealandia's drowning. These tales don't just entertain, they encode survival strategies, reminding listeners that change is cyclical, and that resilience means remembering what the land once was. Why does this theme resonate so powerfully? Maybe because land bridges are the ultimate underdogs, heroic pathways that emerge against all odds, only to vanish when their work is done. Or perhaps it's the bittersweet truth they represent, that every connection is temporary, and every border is just a pause in Earth's endless reshuffling. As we face our own era of rising seas, these stories feel less like fiction and more like field guides, teaching us to navigate a world where the maps keep rewriting themselves. The story of lost land bridges is more than a geological curiosity. It's a profound reminder that the ground beneath our feet is never as permanent as it seems. These vanished highways didn't just connect landmasses, they stitched together the very fabric of life on Earth, guiding the footsteps of early humans, the migrations of mammoths, and the spread of ideas across continents now separated by vast oceans. Every time we look at a modern map, we're seeing only a snapshot in time, a fleeting arrangement of land and sea that will inevitably shift again. The lessons etched into these drowned landscapes are urgent. Adaptability isn't just a survival strategy, it's written into our DNA. Consider the resilience of those who walked these bridges. The first people to cross Beringia didn't know they were pioneers, yet their choices shaped the population of 2 continents. Doggerland's hunters, forced to retreat as waters rose, carried their knowledge to higher ground, seeding new cultures across Europe. These weren't catastrophes but transitions, moments when humanity's ingenuity was tested and tempered. Today, as coastal cities grapple with rising tides, we're facing a similar test not from natural climate cycles, but from our own actions. The difference. We have the tools to read Earth's ancient playbook, to learn from the past instead of repeating its hardships. The legacy of land bridges lives on in unexpected ways. Modern shipping routes often trace the same paths as Ice Age migrations, following submerged river valleys that once teemed with life. Geneticists trace ancestry through mitochondrial DNA, revealing connections between peoples separated by millennia and oceans. Even our languages carry echoes of these lost connections, with words for sea and home overlapping in cultures that once shared dry land. It's as if the planet itself is whispering to us, urging us to remember that borders are illusions and connection is our oldest survival skill. So what comes next, as technology lets us peer deeper into drowned worlds? We're not just uncovering history, we're preparing for the future. The same sonar that maps Doggerland's forests could guide the design of flood-resistant cities. Studies of how species adapted to fragmented land bridges might help conservationists protect biodiversity in a warming world. And indigenous knowledge, honed over generations of living with environmental change, offers wisdom no textbook can match. The story of land bridges isn't over. It's simply entering a new chapter, one where we're both the authors and the protagonists. If these ancient pathways teach us anything, it's that change isn't something to fear, it's the current we've always navigated. The next time you stand on a shoreline, try picturing the land extending beyond the horizon, a hidden world waiting to be remembered. And if you've enjoyed this journey through Earth's lost highways, let us know in the comments which land bridge captivates your imagination. Is it Beringia's frozen steppes, Doggerland's drowned forests, or the tropical Eden of Sundaland? Don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into history's greatest mysteries. After all, the past isn't just behind us, it's beneath the waves, and its lessons are more alive than